Hello, everybody. Jonathan Roberts here, the External Affairs Director at the Country Land and Business Association. I'm joined by Susan Twining, who's our Policy Chief for Land Use, and of course, our President, Victoria Vyvyan. And we're here to talk about that announcement on the SFI that has sent some shockwaves through the industry this week. We're going to talk a little bit about what the announcement is, exactly how it will affect our members, and no doubt we'll talk a little bit about the politics as well. Just as a bit of a heads up before we get started, there's a range of information available on our website, cla.org.uk, to help you navigate the period ahead. So, Susan, let's come to you first. Why don't you start by telling us exactly what the announcement is?
Thanks, Jonathan. So DEFRA announced the closure of the Sustainable Farming Incentive Scheme to new applicants with immediate effect on the 11th of March. The scheme the changes apply to new applicants only. All existing agreements and those who have already applied will be honoured. DEFRA has stated that the reason for the closure is a result of the SFI budget limit being reached, and the industry was informed of the DEFRA decision at that point of closure. We didn't have any notice before that. What this means for individuals: for those with one or more of the 37,000 agreements already in place, there is no change and you should carry on as planned. For those with applications submitted, you will need to wait for approval and sign agreements within the 10-day limit. For all others, there is no access to the scheme, other than perhaps for a few who have requested digital support or have been affected by some technical issues, but the rules on that are being looked into. How many businesses are affected? Well, we don't really know. There are no published figures and it will depend on how many were planning to apply. But based on the BPS applicant numbers of 80,000 holdings, we think that more than half have still to apply. It will also affect those who plan to put in additional applications for some of the new actions that were planned in 2025. We've been looking at who might be most affected, and we think that this may well affect more of the smaller businesses, but it will include businesses of all size. The good news is, if there is some, that there will be a new scheme, but it won't be soon. They're planning to develop a new scheme over the coming months, but it's not going to be available until 2026. And its funding level will be dependent on the June 2025 spending review. This means that for those farms not already in SFI, will probably have to wait a minimum of 12 months before they can access any funding. The new SFI is also likely to be very different, with fewer available actions, more capped actions and more targeting. There is also a stated intention by DEFRA that they will target towards farmers that can deliver more for the environment and those that have less profitable farming. So that looks like a lot of change will be happening. So there will be some significant impacts on businesses, which we are looking at the moment.
Susan, thank you. Victoria, our members are going to be really quite worried about this, right?
Well, my experience of the last week is different, perhaps, to the one that is published by the government, in that the rumours started to swirl pretty vigorously on Friday of last week that SFI was going to be paused or stopped. And there was quite a lot of panic, because there are a lot of people who simply weren't ready to submit. I had a good example this morning. My nephew told me that their next door neighbours on Dartmoor have been working with Dartmoor Wildlife Trust to bring together a really substantial scheme on the very edge of the moor, and that neither the Wildlife Trust nor the landowner are ready to make their submission, because these things are complicated. They're not straightforward and easy, and they only came out of their mid-tier agreement in December anyway. So it's, of course, our members are going to be worried. It's not at all straightforward. The people who are in some schemes already were probably intending to make additional applications later this year. There are 14 new options for the expanded offer that we would normally call countryside stewardship, and those are not going to be brought forward at all in this tranche. So all kinds of plans have been made. I find it hard not to feel a little bit like I've wasted 5 years. You know, we've worked really hard to make this an amazing scheme that English and British and Welsh farmers could feel proud of. and we seem to have been cut off at the knees.
Yeah, one thing that's been particularly frustrating for me, I'm a comms guy, right? So I like to start with the founding principle that anything you say should be true, and I've been looking at some of the comms from government over the last 24 hours. They've made a big sort of selling point of this record £5 billion investment that they're making into agriculture, and it's the biggest budget ever in the world, and we've secured it from the Treasury amidst all these cuts. But of course, well, there's two things. One is that £5 billion is over 2 years. And secondly is, well, we all know that inflation has eroded the budget over the years, and that really rather stops it from being record. Did we have a sense, do you think, of any reasonable expectation that a big chunk of that £5 billion had already been spent? And do you think the government has been fully, dare I say, transparent over the numbers, both in recent weeks, but also the last year or so?
I'm going to jump in there and say that three phrases or words that have been used in the last 2 days. One was how much the Secretary of State admires transparency. And this particular action could only be described as wholly opaque, because none of us knew it was going to happen, and then it suddenly did happen. We've also were told that it was both a magnificent success and an unavoidable interruption. So we've got an unavoidable success on our hands, a transparent unavoidable success, and that's not how it feels. That's not how it feels from the perspective of the members. It just feels like a chaotic mess, frankly.
And Susan, we've got a cash flow crisis coming for a big chunk of the industry, haven't we?
It's bound to be. There, as Victoria was saying, there'll be a lot of businesses who, not for any tardiness, have part of their business planning. They were looking at putting in an SFI application this year, and they will be relying on that. We've heard of examples where new tenants have part of their business plan was to be able to get into SFI, and they will be missing out on perhaps a year's worth, and then a new scheme that is unclear what it will be. So it destroys their business plan. And it's difficult to know what people are actually going to be able to do. We've been looking at some of the actions, but at the moment it is really just assessing what the damage might be and what possible actions that there could be that they could take. But every business is different in the situation, and not everybody is going to be able to react quickly, because it is such a sudden cliff edge that people have been put into.
And that's probably a good time to remind members in particular that if you are worried about the nature of your own business and the impact on your business, please do contact us for advice. Make use of your membership, call your regional office. We can help, and we want to help. Victoria, so much of these schemes, as they've been developed, so much of this sort of messaging around them has been about moving to a much more nature-friendly farming model. I know just before we started recording, you used the term nature negative. And what's your sense of the impact on the broader environment as a result of this?
Well, if the schemes that you were planning to go into were of necessity the ones that were going to be more, you were going to commit more time, more land to regeneration or regenerative practices in farming, then those are the people who will not yet be into the scheme. If you haven't got any scheme to go into because you haven't yet entered into SFI 23 or 24, and you've got no cash flow going through the system, and you've got no reserves on which to rest for the next 12 months, I can only see that people will need to intensify their practices, not because they're willfully wanting to get rid of the great advances they've already made, but because they have no choice. So, triple width headlands will go down to the statutory minimum. You will stock up instead of maintaining your stock and using, there will just be more stock on the ground. These are the solutions that are available to people to get through this period. If you have carefully created wonderful species-rich grassland, which has a very kind of low intensity and a low output in terms of grass, you're going to look at that species-rich grassland and say, well, I'm afraid we're going to have to spray that one off and put it down to rye, because that way we know what we're going to get out of it at the end. So it could have a real effect on the natural successes the successes for nature that we've already had. And I think we're just beginning to really see those. As you go around the country, the landscape looks different. We are seeing the effect of the early years, and well, fingers crossed that where possible, people will stick with the programs that they've been in before.
Susan, I'm just going to come to you last. There's this promise of a new scheme. Talk to us about what we might need from that scheme, and what the process from here on in will be to develop it, because we all know, the three of us know as well as anybody, the effort that's been needed to put into the previous schemes has been huge from organisations such as the CLA. I mean, this isn't easy work, is it, to develop new schemes? So just talk us through that.
Well, that's right. I mean, as Victoria said, the last 5 years have been spent developing SFI through various iterations, from the pilot right the way through to SFI 22, 23, and then what was close to the final scheme, the SFI 24 expanded offer. Now, we always knew it was going to evolve, and as Victoria said, if the government had come to us last October, we could have been looking at some of these evolutions to avoid this cliff edge. Anyway, we are where we are, and there will be things that we will need to look at anyway. All these new schemes, we have got fantastic benefits that we want to maintain, things like the rolling application window, the quarterly payments, the flexibility that comes from being able to choose what's right for an individual business. We want to retain all these really good things about SFI. The reality is we will probably be working in a more constrained economic environment, although arguably this is not about subsidies, this is about payments for public goods, and the value of SFI is in the collective little changes that everybody is making, having a big impact on the environment. And I really worry about the constraining of this particular part of the budget, because it will have an impact. This is the part that most people across the whole country can engage with, most of the farmers. So we somehow need to, that's maybe a different argument about what the budget should actually be, and how we deliver that. But the actual content, we will see more targeting. There will probably be more capping of some of the options, as we saw coming through in SFI 24 when there was limits on 10 of the options. We'll maybe see bundles, so you're not allowed to just do one activity, you have to do a bundle of activities, which, to be fair, has been trialed already. There's a massive amount of good trialing and piloting that we can draw on for the next stage, and I think we'll probably see some of the funding being more targeted towards the uplands and some of the more challenged farming systems. Now, that's not necessarily just the uplands. There are others that are in very valuable habitats in lower areas where the farming is very challenged. So it could be not just the uplands, but certainly the uplands certainly have suffered to some extent in the last round of the development of SFI, and common land as well, which was always left to the end and really needs to be sorted first this time. And then everything else will be easy.
And I could jump in there really, Susan, and say, we embarked on a new agricultural policy for the England that had left the European Union. It was a massive opportunity. Everybody felt very excited about it, and we entered into all of those discussions in good faith. I think the good faith has been damaged in the last 6 months. Of course, the CLA will go back to those tables to discuss and inform the new reduced, restricted SFI, which won't be called SFI, because a lot of time will be wasted discussing what it's going to be called. And we will go back and we will argue, but probably the biggest message that we should be sending out now, apart from our sense of fury and despair, is we could have helped this. This was an avoidable disaster. If they had come to us and asked us and brought the industry to the table, this did not need to happen. And so learning from that maybe that's a difficult concept in politics, learning from your mistakes, this new iteration of SFI must be developed with the CLA and the other organisations at the heart of it. Otherwise, that loss of good faith will just be prolonged.
I remember you and I, Victoria, some time ago now, going off to meet the then Shadow Secretary of State, Steve Reed. And there was this conversation about how many people feel the government is something that's done to them rather than something they kind of participate in. And Mr. Reed was very clear that he wanted to change that culture and move towards a spirit of co-design and mutual respect and all of these, you know, holding hands, skipping through meadows underneath the rainbow and all that kind of thing. I think we need to get back to those principles and be reminding the government of that, you know, laudable.
I think that's completely true, but we also need to stand firm and say we are delivering a phenomenal amount already. We are delivering 65% of the food that's needed for 70 million people. We are delivering a nature recovery. This is not a subsidized system. We are being paid under contract to deliver the things that the British public need: clean air, clean water, healthy soils. And I think we still need to be very strong about reminding government that they need us and we are here to help, but we're not to be taken for granted.
And of course, reminding the public who've been incredibly supportive of our inheritance tax campaign. But one thing I have noticed in public discussion on these schemes is, you know, words such as subsidy are quite deeply embedded in the conversation, and we need to find ways of changing that language. You're absolutely right. Right, we're going to call it a day there. Thank you to everybody for listening, wherever you are. If you're not a member of the CLA, by the way, you should be. And you can join online, cla.org.uk, where you'll also find a range of resources which are there to help members get through these difficult times and, of course, other difficult times for the other reasons. But Victoria, Susan, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.